to thank the Bill Peralta Academy for allowing me some time to explain how to do business with the city. So we can move to the next slide. We can get started. Again, this is a presentation on doing business with the Peralta Community College District. Next slide, please. And in today's course overview, I'll be speaking about our mission statement, the rules and regulations and policies pertaining to purchasing functions. I'll talk about vendor registration, and I'll tell you about the purchasing warehouse process. Next slide, please. So this is our goals that we have to meet to ensure that we're successful within our operation. And these are internal goals, but I wanted to share them with you. Our goals are to ensure that goods and services necessary for the operation of the district are obtained at the competitive prices. We want to guarantee fairness in the selection of vendors and putting more tax dollars into education while providing savings, service, and solutions, supporting the achievements and success of every student and teacher in the district. And we want to obtain goods, services, and construction for public purposes according to the laws and procedures intended to provide for the economical expenditures of public funds. Next slide, please. So as you know, or may not know, everything that we're doing that utilizes taxpayers' funds have to be governed. And when we do purchasing, we are required to abide by those procurement regulations. We have what's called California Contract Code regulations, and it talks about or requires competitive bidding for certain goods and services. We also have to comply with Ed Code. Ed Code defines informal contracting levels and exempts certain goods from competition. To the left, you'll see that we have to comply with board policy. Our board, it governs the district, and what they do is they define expending authority for purchasing and contracts, and they also dictate to the administration to come up with procedures that define the purchasing and contract procedures process. Next slide, please. So who has the authority to purchase goods and supplies for the district? The chancellor is delegated by the board the authority to purchase supplies, materials, apparatus, and equipment and services up to the public contract code threshold, beyond which a competitive bid process is required. The purchase of goods and services shall be made through the purchasing department, following authorized procedures in accordance with those policies and laws. Next slide, please. Here's some of the functions pertinent to purchasing. Let me start over. We procure goods and services for the district. So purchasing by any other means is not permitted unless authorized by a written policy. We buy supplies, equipment, and services. We issue written purchase orders and contracts for materials and services purchased. We maintain a vendor database. We utilize vendors registered with the online vendor registry database to procure goods and services. We receive and deliver material, and we dispose of surplus, obsolete, or scrap materials. Next slide, please. Vendor registration, very important. In order to do business with us, you must be registered with the district. To apply to become a registered vendor, you have to download the vendor application and the W-9 forms from our website, and the link is shown below. Forward that information to our purchasing department for processing. You can deliver or mail them to the address at 501 Fifth Avenue in Oakland, or by fax at the fax number shown in the slide. Next, complete the online vendor registration system to receive quotes, bids, and RFP solicitations. If you want to do business with us, make sure you complete that process. You're required to use this registration system when the district elects to receive electronic quotes and sealed bid submittals. For assistance, you can call the purchasing department at this number. There are 3 links on that website that you need to complete. That's the vendor application link, downloading the W-9 form, and the online vendor registration and bid notification system. Next slide, please. Now, and this is very important, I can't read the red, but I know what it says, okay? All purchases or commitments to buy are made through the use of a purchase order. No invoice submitted by a vendor shall be paid unless the purchase was made by the purchasing director, his or her authorized agent, or board designee. The purchase order number must appear on all invoices. And very important, and this is what's in red, do not accept any orders, contracts, or requisitions without a duly authorized purchase order. So if someone asks you to perform a project for us, make sure you ask for the purchase order, okay? The purchase order is a commercial document and first official offer issued by a buyer to a seller with a request to order a product or service. It is used as a vehicle to pay invoices. The purchase order indicates types, quantities, and agreed prices for products or services. It is used to control the purchasing of products and services from external suppliers. When the seller accepts the purchase order, it forms a legally binding contract between the buyer and the seller. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about construction and maintenance projects. Construction and maintenance projects are managed by the Department of General Services, and they have two different definitions as per Public Contract Code. California Public Contract Code defines public projects as construction, reconstruction, erection, alteration, renovation, improvement, demolition, and repair work involving any publicly owned, leased, or operated facility. It includes painting or repainting of any publicly owned, leased, or operated facility. It requires facilities review, approval, and project coordination. Maintenance, on the other hand, is defined by routine, recurring, and usual work for the preservation or protection of any publicly operated facility for its intended purposes. It includes minor repainting, resurfacing of streets and highways at less than 1 inch, landscape maintenance, including mowing, watering, trimming, pruning, planting, replacement of plants, and servicing irrigation and sprinkler systems. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview of public works and maintenance projects threshold criteria. And we use CUPCCAA for our construction at this, at Peralta. So any purchases for $60,000 or less, the district can negotiate a contract or issue a written a purchase order, but we need one written quote or proposal. Anything between $60,000 and up to $200,000 requires informal bidding per CUPCCAA. Anything over $200,000 requires formal bids. And I guess I should tell you what CUPCCAA means. CUPCCAA is the California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act. It provides an alternative to the normal or the old way of doing construction projects, and it provides a lot of flexibility to ensure that projects can be done in a faster method. Okay, so with maintenance projects, CUPCCAA covers maintenance projects as well. The same criteria exists. $60,000 or less, we can issue a purchase order and negotiate a contract. $60,000 and up to $95,200, that's the difference. We require informal bidding. More than $95,200 requires formal bids. That $95,200 is the threshold for formal bids, and the threshold for construction under CUPCCAA is $200,000. Next slide, please. We also receive and deliver your goods to the that we receive to our district. When you are shipping items to our warehouse, make sure that you clearly display the purchase order number on all packaging documents. The shipments that we receive are delivered to the warehouse without a purchase order number may be returned to the vendor or supplier. So again, you see how important that purchase order is. All shipping and other related charges will be borne by the vendor, shipper, or the person who authorized the shipment. Next slide, please. So if your resource for purchasing is right on your computer. Visit the purchasing website. We have a lot of resourceful information there, and we appreciate your interest. You can always call me directly or my staff. All the information is on the website. Okay, so that is the how to do business presentation right there. Next slide, please. Or you want to. All right, so I'm going to go right into CUPCCA. And this is one thing that I'm glad that this district was able to implement, because it provides an opportunity, especially to small local businesses within our area. So I'll get right to it. Next slide, please. What is it? CUPCCA allows a district to use alternative bidding procedures for construction contracts. It was enacted in 1983 under Public Contract Code Section 22,000. It allows public agencies to use a force account labor to perform public projects. Force account means using our own forces up to 750 hours, or we can utilize purchase orders and or contracts. It provides alternate bid limits for the public works projects. It simplifies procedures for the authorization of emergency work. Very important. Next slide, please. How is it implemented? The first thing we had to do was elect by resolution to become subject to CUPCCA requirements. Resolution had to be filed with the State Controller's Office. The entire district became subject to the act. We complied with the implementation requirements, and we are now subject to CUPCCA, including maintenance. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to go over the thresholds again. 60,000 or less for construction, including repairs, we can negotiate a contract or issue a purchase order. Over $60,000 and up to 200,000 requires informal bidding. Anything over 200,000 requires formal bidding. Next slide, please. Here are the thresholds for maintenance. Again, $60,000 or less for maintenance, we can negotiate a contract or issue a purchase order. Anything over $60,000 but up to $95,200 requires informal bidding. Anything more than $95,200 requires formal bidding. Okay, next slide. Here's some requirements for construction projects. Contractors must pay prevailing wages. A payment bond is required for our contracts over $25,000, and we also want a performance bond included. Also, vendors must comply with Ed Code for fingerprinting. They must comply with Ed Code for Field Act compliance, and change orders for contracts below $60,000 are only permitted up to the maximum of $60,000. Next slide, please. Again, and I'll just reiterate what I said before about the definition of public projects. It involves reconstruction, construction, erection, alteration, renovation, improvement, demolition, and repair work. It also includes painting or repainting of any publicly owned, leased, or operated facility. Next slide. Here's, again, the maintenance is defined, which is routine, recurring, and usual work for the preservation or protection of any publicly operated facility for its intended purposes. Minor repainting, resurfacing of streets and highways at less than 1 inch. Landscape maintenance, including mowing, watering, trimming, pruning, planting, replacement of plants, and servicing irrigation and sprinkler systems. Next slide, please. We could also use a force account, which refers to work performed on public projects through our internal resources. When we do this, we have to provide CUPCCA with direct cost information, indirect cost, and overhead cost. In direct cost, we have to identify labor, including our benefit cost, equipment charged on an hourly rate, including depreciation, insurance, maintenance, repair, fuel and oil, tires, grease, etc. Cost of materials and supplies with a total unit of $25 or more must be reported. We have to include other labor, including inspection, clerical, and supervision, other expenses, including utilities, telephone, temporary fencing, and overhead costs. Rarely do we use force accounts for CUPCCA. Next slide, please. We also have to comply with California's prevailing wage requirements and labor codes. One thing that I have our district do is that there is a project that's more than $25,000 for public projects, and we want an independent contractors agreement. For public works over $25,000, again, it requires a payment bond. For maintenance contracts, if we have a project over $15,000, we want the district to negotiate a contract with that vendor. Next slide, please. This is how it works. It's very important that you register. We have on our website, we have a link called CUPCCA. And on that link, you can click the link. You can enter the information that you see here. And when you click the link, it will be emailed to us via Adobe Sign, and you can use your electronic signature. Okay. We have to give you information every November to either trade journals or to the contracts that have already given us their CUPCCA application. Right now, we need you. We need people to go to our website. We need people to go to that CUPCCA link. And if you're a licensed contractor, complete that information, click the link, and it'll come to us immediately. That information will include your contact name and mailing address, contact phone number, fax number, and email address, the type of work the contractor is interested in performing. You must include your license, your class license and number. We create an updated contractors list on January 1 of the next year. We may include contractors that submit required information during the calendar year or prior to November or December, or even if you bid during the year, we would ask that you complete that application and get on our list. Okay. We can also eliminate contractors from the prior list who do not annually reapply for inclusion. Next slide, please. These are the procedures continued. We have to send a notice if there's a bid that's coming up. We have to send a notice to all contractors on the list for category of work or specified trade journals, both at least 10 days before bids are due. CUPCCA has regional requirements of trade journals that we're required to send notices to for bids. The bids must include a general description of the project work, how to obtain detailed information, the time and place to submit bids. We do not need to include drawings, but we will likely do so. The governing board may delegate authority to award informal contracts to specific staff members, and that would be the VC of finance. Let me see, EC requires all delegated transactions to be approved or ratified every 60 days. You see this in blue. If all bids received that are formal, if they receive $200,000, the board may pass by a resolution a 4/5 vote to award the contract up to $212,500 or less to the lowest responsible bidder if the district's cost estimate was reasonable. Next slide. So I want to give you just a little example of what a repair is and what the difference is between this and maintenance. So repairs, the scope, the cost, the complexity factor into whether a project is maintenance or construction. Here's an example. Replacing a utility pole with a light pole would be maintenance. Replacing a utility pole with a pole with new and improved technology would be considered construction. Example 2, replacement of a steel beam in a building that had deteriorated with a new but identical beam would be considered a construction repair rather than maintenance because of the project's scale and complexity. Next slide. Maintenance with factors to consider. The facility needs to be currently in existence. The work needs to be routine, recurring, and usual. The need for the work must be based on keeping the facility in functioning and useful order to preserve it for future use. Okay. Next slide. Is that it? Okay, so here are the formal bidding procedures. They basically resemble the regular formal bid procedures that we use prior to CUPCCA. However, we must email and mail notice inviting bids to our trade journals specified in the Cost Accounting Act at least 15 days prior to the bid opening. We must publish in a newspaper of general circulation that is published in the district at least 14 calendar days before the bid opening date. We have to include detailed architectural plans. We have and other bid documents. The bid may reject it if the board declares at a hearing that the project could be more economically performed by district employees, and notice of district's intent is mailed at least 2 days before the hearing. If all bids are rejected, the board may abandon the project or re-advertise, or have the project done by force account, passing a 4/5 resolution vote declaring that the project can be more economically performed by district employees. One of the things I wanted to say though, and is this the last slide? One more slide. The board may proceed at once to replace or repair without giving notice, inviting bids by 4/5 vote. And this will not permit the delay or action that's necessary to respond to the emergency. If no bids are given, the board shall review the emergency action at the next board meeting and each meeting until the emergency is terminated to determine by 4/5 vote that need continue to exist. One thing I wanted to say though is I've given you all the information, but I put myself in your position saying, okay, thank you for the slide presentation, but how does it benefit me, a small local business? Well, this strategy offers the ability to target contracting opportunities directly to small local businesses and SLBEs for items under $60,000. That's why it's important that you go to our website and register, and also provide your letter of certification to us so that we can start building the list, and we can use that list when for small projects under $60,000. It also is a benefit for those contracts between $60,000 and $200,000 because firms who are pre-qualified can also bid directly on informal projects and also act as subcontractors and also act to comply with the 25% participation requirements. So that's a huge, huge strategy to help build and provide contracting opportunities to small local businesses. Okay, so we need you to get on our website. We're committed to the small local business, the small emerging local business here in our area. And if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me directly on our website. I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Ray Loving.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll just jump right into it. And again, thanks again, everybody, for attending. I'm excited and pleased with the amount of attendees we have on the show. So I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm sure everybody wants to hurry up and get to the Q&A. And the majority of my material is really about compliance and audit, and it's just really for your information only. But I think some of it's pertinent, especially to small companies that may not have done business on a specific community college bond program. Okay. Next. So first and foremost, again, for those firms that may not have done business with a bond program, it's very specific in how the monies can be expended because these are public funds and they are directly connected to property tax rolls. So one of the key things I always like to point out is the ballot language for Measure A and Measure G in any bond program is very specific. It's specific to each campus, and they have specific projects listed. So my point being is it's just kind of pertinent for you to understand that unlike commercial, you won't be getting direction to just arbitrarily or ad hoc work on any project. The bond programs are very prescriptive in what they can be spent on. The language is very specific as it relates to new construction, renovation that you heard Brian talking about. And typically recurring maintenance is usually not allowed for bond programs. Proposition 39 actually requires for every bond program the district to establish a bond oversight committee, and they have a specific duty, along with others, of course, but they're specifically organized to ensure to the public that the bonds are expended only those projects on the bond project list in the ballot language I spoke of at the beginning. Okay. Again, this won't directly affect most of you, but those of us in the finance side, we kind of like to also reiterate to the vendors that they're actually a part of the actual forecast that we submit to the district. It's very critical that we do our planning and strategic, for lack of a better term, outlook for the program, and we attach it to the finances again. And this serves a few purposes. Just like in commercial, it's the obvious. It enhances how you manage your budget. It helps you prepare for unforeseen financial events, helps you prepare for the market, and also gives you some trending data historically on how you're going to spend going forward. Are we spending smartly? It also helps in decision-making with the client as it revolves around changing project plans, et cetera. But one thing I have to emphasize that we can't emphasize enough, this also has to be submitted because the financial houses, they really require that the forecast be somewhat accurate because it also can sway when they go out for the new bonds. So without getting too technical, bonds are sold in tranches. They're not, you don't sell the full $1 billion all at once. They come in sections, for lack of a better term. So these cash flows we can't emphasize enough how critical it is because it really does sway when the client does go back out to sell additional bonds. Now, you may be asking, okay, so what? Where do I play in that? Well, again, you heard Bonnie James talk about scheduling earlier. So any unforeseen things that occur, delays, et cetera, can impact how we forecast, and it can have an impact to the client. So just wanted to point out just like in commercial, we do spend a lot of time in forecasting how the money gets spent. Okay. When it comes to California community colleges and K-12s, their fiscal year ends June 30, and they're on what's called the modified accrual. And all that means from a non-technical standpoint is that we have to recognize cost in a fiscal year when the services were rendered or when the goods were received prior to June 30. So it matters not whether the invoice came in, it matters not whether you know for sure what the cost is going to be. You have to forecast or use the invoice in hand to basically recognize the cost of that fiscal year. And again, some of you may be saying, how does that affect me? Well, as I stated earlier, the bond program only allows cost for those projects in the ballot language. So if you are out there getting direction to do work where you don't have a contract, you may not have a PO, if this doesn't get resolved prior to June 30, it could significantly impact when you get paid or if you ever get paid at all. So I just want to emphasize something Brian said earlier that seems obvious, but it just have to be certain who's directing your work and make sure that you have an authorized contract or a PO prior to year end, because it does cause a problem for the district at the end of the year. We all, again, I know this is the boring stuff. None of us like the audit word, but because it's a bond program, they're uniquely required to have not one, but actually two audits. So all community colleges and K-12s are always required to have the financial audit, but under Prop 39, under bond program, there's an additional wrinkle. They're also required to have a performance audit. So as most of us on this call know, the financial audits are just like anywhere else in the world, be it private or government, is really to determine that the financial information stated there in the financial statements are fairly presented, they go through their testing, et cetera. Performance audit is a tad different, where it's more about the kind of the policies and procedures, They also can question whether we're following best practices and industry standards. For instance, one example, which is easy, is change orders. A performance audit will look at not just the financial aspect, but how are we managing change orders? How is the client assuring that you're not going over a certain percentage? Again, it's really about just best practice, and also make sure they're in compliance with the district's policies and procedures. They could look at, you heard Brian talk about procurement. You know, they can examine how we're doing a procurement. Again, is it best practice? Does it meet standards? Does it fall within the policies and procedures that are outlined within law or within the district? And also, of course, like in any audit, they have a duty, they being the firms, have a duty, they don't have a choice to report significant findings and recommendations. And these, again, under performance audit can be very wide reaching as far as how we are all doing our business for our client. Okay. Okay, so what happens when there's a finding? There are three types typically. Most firms, they may change the wording, but they basically fall into three camps: low priority or insignificant, mid, and high. And these findings are public documents that typically go out to the website and also are scrutinized by constituency groups, other stakeholders, et cetera, and they require immediate resolution. Typically, once the audit is done, the client, along with our help, of course, has to respond to either how do we mediate this finding, how are we going to correct it next year, and of course, the main thing there is repeat findings are not good. So again, I've always thought it was important that our vendors are our partners. You know, there's no secrets. We're transparent. We just think it's important to know also the kind of scrutiny that bond programs are under. None of us like to be bureaucratic just for the sake of it, but again, these are public funds, and we treat this kind of very seriously. And I believe that would be it for me.